It's a challenging time to be a teacher. We don't get paid a lot, the days can be long and exhausting, demands from students, parents, admins, and districts can be intense. There's always room for improvement and there is always more to do. There are always new procedures to learn, new programs to run, new strategies to master. But it's when our fire burns the lowest that we remember our purpose. We teach because we're resilient. We teach because we're problem solvers. We teach because investing in kids is one of the highest callings we can imagine. We teach because we know that the classroom can be a place of magic and possibility. We teach because we have an unquenchable fire for learning and a passion to share it. We teach because our colleagues are some of the best human beings we will ever meet. We teach because we have an opportunity to influence the global citizens that will make this world a better place. If you're still on fire for learning and growth, join the Teachers on Fire Roundtable for conversations that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your practice. You'll hear from real people and real educators with real solutions, not make-believe perfection, but ideas, inspiration, and a path toward change and transformation in K-12 education today. My name is Tim Cavey. I'm an 8th grade teacher, assistant principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. I'm inviting you to join us at the Teachers on Fire Roundtable. Because you matter, your voice is important, and we are all better together. Welcome back and good morning, Teachers on Fire. I'm so glad to have you here this morning as we get into another conversation that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. I've got in studio with me this morning Vince Bustamante. He is an ECSD assessment consultant. He's the author of Great Teaching by Design, or I should say co-author, right? And the Assessment Playbook, both from Corwin Press. Vince, thank you so much for joining me this morning. How are you feeling?
Thanks for having me. I'm feeling great. Nice, good way to start a Saturday morning. I'm not going to lie, kind of rolled out of bed and got here and was really looking forward to a good conversation this morning.
I am so pumped to have you and so grateful that you accepted my invitation on short notice. So thank you so much for that. Well, I'd like to start with, you said you're feeling great. Where would you put yourself from 1 to 5? 1 being burnout, 5 being on fire?
Like a 3.5, I think. And I feel like it's probably because it's Saturday morning. You asked me, and I still have, and it's a Saturday morning of a long weekend. So 3.5 is kind of where I'm at. A lot of things happening, but I've been trying to be a little bit more deliberate in taking time for myself when it's scheduled. So we're actually heading out for a little mini vacation here to Banff National Park as soon as we're done on this call. So that's probably why I'm pushing towards 5.
Nice. Well, that's pretty honest. And I have to say, if you're not familiar with the Banff area of Canada, possibly the most spectacular region in all of North America, in my unbiased opinion, and that is coming from a British Columbian. So there you go. Well, I do want to say hi to viewers in our live audience, live and on the replay. We've got in the house Shannon Shinko coming in from PG. It's rainy right now. Good to have you, Shannon. And Nick also coming in from Alberta, I believe, if I remember correctly. Great to see you, Nick, here as well. Let us know how you two are doing from 1 to 5, 1 being burnout, 5 being on fire. How are you holding up? Well, Vince, this week, I shared this question on Twitter, and this was so great. I so appreciate your response. I'm going to put it up here in a moment. But my question was, what is the purpose of assessment? I was kind of commissioned to write about this for my staff, and I was like, oh, the weight of this question is just killing me. I'm going to put your answer up here. It's focused on process over product. So let me do some clicking around here. And we'll put that up on the screen. So here was Vince's answer. Process over product assessment. The purpose of the assessment is to inform the teacher of what the next instructional step should be to move students to mastery. And I so appreciate that. Talk more about that, Vince. What do you mean by process over product?
Yeah, so the more I've been working with students and staff in all aspects and all levels, I feel like there's a degree of student agency that is necessary in the assessment. And one of the ways that I kind of describe it is process-focused assessment over product-focused assessment. So when we focus on the process of student learning, we're managing their growth, or we're fostering a growth towards mastery. Whereas what I would call old school or traditional assessment, where it's all of your grades or your evaluation is focused on a series of products that you put together. And one of the things that a series of products doesn't do necessarily is foster mastery. So, for example, if our students in elementary are working on addition, and we assess them in September, and the student gets a 50%, and then we assess them again a month later, and the student gets 80%. Oftentimes, we average those two, when in reality, we should just be defaulting to the higher grade because the student has demonstrated growth. So, involving students in the process, allowing students to share what they know, because students know more about themselves than teachers will ever know about them. And sometimes our assessment practices are guesswork at best. And so I use that GPS analogy all the time. And so I wanted to add that into that Twitter comment, which is just our GPS systems that we use on our cars or when we're driving continually assess what's happening, or report what's happening ahead, and recalculate depending on conditions. And I think that's no different than the purpose of an assessment for a teacher, is to allow the teacher and the student to recalculate the path that they're taking towards that same goal.
I like that so much, and apologies, I should have read that part of the tweet as well. That was important, and I love that image, by the way, because my car is so good at recalculating when I miss turns and make mistakes. I'm thinking about, for years we've heard about never assess student work until they are right at the finish line, or you hear that a lot. So can you make that distinction when you talk about assessing through the process? Are we talking about formative only that doesn't go into the grade book, or what do you have in mind there?
Yeah, so I think in any case, formative assessment should be 70 to 80% of classroom interactions. I think a feedback loop where you can leverage not just the teacher-student dialogue, but peer-to-peer dialogue, student self-reflection, and really, for lack of a better term, just like if we could open up our students' brains and just figure out what's happening in there and how we can leverage what they're trying to tell us, we can then get a greater or gain a greater perspective on how we should be evaluating them. So a lot of formative. However, I will say too, Tim, and you probably know this, the dichotomy of formative and summative is a little bit challenging, because we can also use summative assessments to reprogram our instruction. So in some cases, summative assessments and formative assessments start to blend together. So more from a validation standpoint, if we're collecting a bunch of information about our student, can we make a validation on where they are rather than assess them and judge them on how they're doing?
Oh, love that. All right, I know you are connected, of course, to Corwin. You're well acquainted with visible learning. You've done teaching around this. And I was looking again at the list of effect sizes that John Hattie has done this huge meta-analysis, and constantly revisiting it is kind of my impression. So he's got this effect, or this factor for learning called self-reported grades, listed right near the top of the pile. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit, because to the best of my knowledge, I don't see many students actually, like when I read this, I think about, are students contributing to the actual report card, or what exactly does that look like? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I'm so happy you asked this question, because just in August, the research database was updated again, and there's been a slight shift, but not a slight shift that nullifies the question. As a matter of fact, self-reported grades at 1.33, I think it's in third place. But slightly above of that is teacher estimates of student achievement. And so those can work hand in hand. And so I'll explain them separately, and then I'll explain how I think they could work together. Self-reported grades is not students just filling out PowerSchool or Gradebook for themselves. Self-reported grades is students providing their self-analysis of how they think they did according to the set criteria. How it could be used in practice is if, let's say I was the student and Tim, you were the teacher. Upon submission of a product, I would also provide some sort of rationale or reflection on what I think I've earned from an assessment standpoint. You would not necessarily have to take that into consideration, but what you would do is you would assess me with your own expert perspective. And then the conversation happens around what did I notice as a student and what did you notice as a teacher? And then the conversation in itself is what leads to that growth. So one of the reasons why it's probably not too common is because it's a little bit newer in the research, but also because it does take a lot of construction on the teacher's behalf. We got to really manipulate the class time to ensure that we're having this proper amount of time. Now, teacher estimates of student achievement would be same thing, Tim. You as your student, you would take some sort of initial or pre-assessment to determine where you think I'm going to end up. So let's be honest, when you've spent enough time with your students, you could probably, if we just turned it into a percentage score, you can generally ballpark where you think your students may fall before even seeing some of their product, unless a student just blows something out of the water or epically collapses on this assessment. We're generally in the right area. If we took those estimates of student achievement and then designed the learning to meet or exceed that, that's when we're seeing the growth. So I see these two kind of working hand in hand, in that you could design an assessment for me based on how you think I'm going to do. And then when I self-report back, it's almost like a triangulated evidence piece. It's your estimation, my self-reporting, and then your final validation.
And those conversations are just about the richest conversations you can have in the classroom environment, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why the effect sizes are so high, because and it's such a shift from the traditional approaches to assessment. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about this in a few minutes, but one of my goals when I work with schools and facilitate is to have a seamless transition from instruction to assessment. They're seen as separate a lot of ways. We need to teach and we need to assess. Whereas I feel like if the assessment is embedded within the instruction and we have these conversations, or the conversations are built in, by the time we get to that, heads down 50-minute quiz on the Friday, we kind of already have a strong sense of where our students should be.
Right. So good. Well, I know, Vince, even talking to you off air, that you are quite an expert in the space of remote learning, and you're familiar with some of the integration between digital apps, tools, and assessment strategies. So this question is first about student efficacy, ownership, and metacognition. How can these digital apps and tools increase the agency and ownership for students?
I think any digital app, and I'm not a proponent of one over the other. I think whatever teachers are using, we have the different categories, like video types, like a Flipgrid, or we have, your Nearpods and all those things. And whatever teachers decide to use is great. And I'm not advocating for one over the other. But what I do think these digital apps and tools do is allow the students to engage in more of a process. So a Flipgrid response that's 55 seconds with a student talking through what they've learned today and why they're learning it and how they know they've learned it does a lot more for me as a teacher than collecting a worksheet. So we get to see them physically process. And there's such a richness in watching a student talk through their learning. And that's one of the biggest attributes of some of these digital apps, is that we allow more student voice in their assessment. And so not moving away specifically from paper and pencil, because there's definitely a need for that in some cases. But as a student, I've received 50-second Flipgrids responses from students who are demonstrating how to add 3+4 and show, they're teaching me using a little whiteboard how to add 3+4. And for me, that's all I need to make an assessment on whether the student understands addition, has a strategy, and uses appropriate vocabulary. I don't need to burden them or myself with homework just for the sake of collecting a product.
Yeah. And in some cases, you might not even need to go to that next level of summative assessment if you've already documented, the proficiency is fully there. I don't need to continue to take more records and more notes, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The documentation is so much easier. here in Edmonton Catholic Schools, our assessment team was working with a first grade teacher who was documenting learning goals in language arts. And one of the learning goals for one of her students was using appropriate finger spacing in her journal. And the assessment of that student were 3 pictures: the journal picture from November, the journal picture from January, and the journal picture from April. And you can see just on one PowerPoint slide that has the 3 different pictures, the absolute progression in that. That's so much more rich than a grade book.
Yeah, that's memories of Austin's butterfly right there. Well, I have to, you mentioned Flipgrid, and I have to give a quick shout out to a tool that I'm sure you've heard of or seen around called Seesaw. I was thinking, I was working with some 7th graders a week or 2 ago on some poetry, and in the past it was sort of poetry based on songs that were meaningful to them personally. And so in the past I might have had, like 10 years ago, I might have had 25 students give their individual Google Slides presentations, and instead I used Seesaw to do some screencasting, so students are talking about their work, and then they are pushing it out to the blog and commenting on each other's work, and just listening to all of that take place. I was like, wow, the engagement and the conversations are so much richer than, having those students fall asleep during 25 presentations, right? So I'm sure the same thing applies in the remote learning environment. Well, a phrase that really caught my attention looking at the information about the assessment playbook for distance and blended learning, a phrase that jumped out is that everything is searchable. And that's really so true. That's not new, but it's only becoming more true, let's say. So how does this reality shape our assessment practice, both in the remote learning environment and in schools where one-to-one devices are sort of ubiquitous?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting conversation because it's not like this became more apparent during distance learning. It's just that now we couldn't limit our students' access, right? Back in physical school, it was you put your phones away. If I see your phone, I'm going to take it, and that's up to the school or even the classroom teacher's discretion. And I'm not advocating one way or the other. But when we started writing this from a lens that students are now at home, and there needs to be an element of trust, we started to realize that if you can Google anything, absolutely anything can be searched on the internet. How can we design our assessments to not focus on the answers specifically, right? So, I'm thinking back to some very, very, even thinking back to my school, where you would have a map and you'd have to label all of the capital cities of each province in Canada, right? And then color the map and do all that stuff. And that's a great mapping activity. But if it's already on Google Maps, how can we leverage the tool to understand what the student knows or does not know? So again, it kind of goes back to that process rather than having Vince solve a multiplication problem, because I can just type it into my calculator. And that's something that we've been fighting for a long time, right? Is calculator math versus non-calculator math. We would use everything leading up to it. So maybe I would record myself answering the problem, and then I get to give my teacher more of a think aloud as an assignment rather than answering 55 multiple choice questions. So that's what I think. That's kind of how I see that kind of shift.
Love it. I know, I don't know if you're familiar with Alice Keeler, but she advocates for constantly or always open computer tests and assessments. I think that's such a bold standard. I'll have to ask her about that sometime. Well, I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to our live and replay audience for joining us. If you're enjoying this conversation with Vince Bustamante, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. That's the single greatest way to support my work. Vince, let's move into your current learning. And my hat goes off to you. You're a busy guy. You've got the district work. You are still doing some speaking, and you've got the PhD on the side. So talk about the focus of your current work at Western. What have you been thinking about lately in those spaces?
Yeah, so the work at Western is an ed doctorate program, so not a PhD, which is a little bit easier in the sense that the PhD would involve me having to do some of my own research. And conducting a study and going all that. The ed doctorate route is still obviously a doctorate, but it's more along the lines of acknowledging a problem of practice that exists in a current educational reality, and then designing an organizational improvement plan That's kind of the goal. So instead of a reported out thesis that I'm defending, I'm proposing an organizational improvement plan. So I'm very fresh into it. I'm only on course 2 of a 3-year program, but I'm loving it. And so far, which this will probably change, the focus of my problem of practice is a general lack of a harmonized mentorship and induction program for new teachers. I feel like in the current context of pandemic teaching and the unfortunate reality of a lot of teachers leaving the profession this year, statistically prior to the pandemic, a very, very high percentage of teachers were leaving the field within the first 5 years. And that's an issue, not only a funding issue, right? Because it costs a lot of money to onboard new teachers and all that stuff, but also we are losing some very, very bright minds. And a lot of the reasons why we're losing some of these bright minds is because of the lack of a mentorship program. And sometimes it's a matter of, again, we'll just use you and I, Tim. Let's say I'm a new teacher and I'm teaching English language arts, and you're another English language arts teacher. 2 days before I arrive, your admin may say, hey, Tim, listen, we got this new guy named Vince. You're going to be his mentor. And there's no rhyme or reason other than the content commonalities, when the research really shows that there needs to be support. There needs to be content support, but there also needs to be mentorship from someone outside of your content area. So what are we doing at a systems level to ensure that we are properly preparing these new teachers? And then what are we doing at a local level? And what I've been finding in a lot of these studies that I've been reading is that one school will do one thing, one school will do another, a third school will do absolutely nothing, and it's all up to the principal's discretion, which in some cases might not be the best approach if we're looking to retain teachers within a certain school district. I work in a large school district. There's a lot of movement, right? Every spring, those temporary teachers may get placed at a different school if there's no space for them. What does that mentorship and onboarding look like as they move from site to site, rather than just, here's a USB full of 1,500 files, and here are your keys, and there's your parking spot? That's what a lot of mentorship looks like right now.
Right. I was just thinking I've been in some well-intentioned mentorship situations where essentially it's, do you need anything? Are you doing okay? Let me know if I can help, and if it's not more intentional than that, maybe it's not too impactful. I think that is huge. You mentioned the mentor, they should have at least one mentor outside of the subject area. Why is that?
It's funny. It was a study I was reading out of Scandinavia, I think more specifically out of Finland, and it was talking about a mentorship system that is forced upon teachers, which is more like the North American model, versus the Scandinavian model, where it's it's almost like it sounds, almost like speed dating, but there's, in a social cocktail party environment, there are mentors and there are new teachers, and they just meet organically. And so there needs to be that organic mentorship that doesn't exist with your same school. Because what happens if what happens if I have an issue with the admin and I don't know that you're very tight with the admin, right? So, and I'm not saying obviously there's some code of conduct stuff that we have to go through there, but there just needs to be a mentor on the side as well that can act as a professional colleague that has no stake, really, no educational stake in that beginning teacher's school, I guess is a better way to put it.
Great comment here from Jenna, who is talking about the coaching and mentorship program, induction and mentorship in her district. We take coaching very seriously here. Well, and again, the same sorts of, we were talking over on the classroom side about the power of assessment and close conferencing, and the same is true on the teaching side. We're starting to wind down, Vince, but some of my favorite questions are coming up. Always interested to hear this one. Thinking of wellness and self-care, what is one app, routine, or maybe a daily practice that gives you clarity and recharges your fire?
So going to the gym, and I don't like the gym, so I'll preface that. So I'm not self-motivated in that I can't just go into a gym and work out without, I just that's not my style. So I'm a member. My wife and I are members at this really great little local gym that has group classes. And my favorite thing about this place, and I'll give a shout out, it's the Project in Edmonton. my favorite thing about this place is that there are no parameters. You come as you are. It's about progress. Actually, their gym statement, which kind of fits with what we're talking about today, is progress over perfection. And it's a supportive environment. And so we 3 to 5 times a week, we're at those classes. And I tend to find that the days that have been a little bit more stressful are the days where I get a much better workout. I'm sure that people can relate to that. So there's that. And then obviously, when I get that downtime to specifically be away from technology, and I've actually, and I don't know if this applies to a lot of people out there, I've turned off my notifications for my work email after 5 p.m. So everything's off. And so I don't even look at it till the next day. And I had to draw that line because during the pandemic, much like many teachers, we were just consistently on. And when you work from home and you're consistently on, it's hard to break away and then feel like you're getting any rest or recuperation.
I really love that one. Whose voices are inspiring you right now, Vince? Which authors, speakers, or creators are lighting your fire for learning?
So I, one of my mentors and friend of mine is named Peter DeWitt. He's written a lot of leadership books. I am very, very interested in his upcoming work that's going to be published on de-implementation. So I wrote a book on implementation, and then as Peter does, he's always on the cutting edge of what's happening educationally. He's putting out a book on de-implementation, as in what are we removing from our plates that's not working and hasn't been working. So I'm very excited about that. With my doctoral work, I get to read a lot of theory. I've read a lot from Ingersoll on teacher mentorship. So if you're looking for mentorship and induction, Ingersoll is one of the fundamental writers. So those would be the two right now. I'm going to be honest with you. With a lot of the doctoral work, I'm not reading as much as I'd like to, but I've definitely been podcasting a lot. And so Teachers on Fire podcast, shout out to Nick Moskluck, who's watching. His podcast out of Calgary is also a brilliant podcast. And then the Edu Crush podcast as well out of Calgary, which is Natalie's podcast, is also brilliant.
Natalie Verdebasso, yeah, she is phenomenal. Her stuff is so high quality, it blows me away every time. Share about an upcoming project or activity that you're focused on that is firing you up.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm so fortunate in my work through Core and Press that I get to go to schools, and it's finally starting to open up enough that I can physically be at these schools. And I'm really focusing on my work that I've done it with Great Teaching by Design. So I have the book here. I'm going to shamelessly plug it. So Great Teaching by Design looks like this. It was published in November 2020. And the issue with publishing during a pandemic is that the book wasn't really pandemic focused or online focused. So it kind of had a slow burn. And now it's starting to become a little more popular in that the book itself is taking some of that visible learning research and implementing it. And proper implementation. So the book essentially is about an implementation cycle. So I get to fly around to schools and drive to schools and work with these brilliant educators from all around North America on the implementation of some of these great practices that they're doing. So that's really been firing me up right now. Also, I do want to give a shout out to the cohort that I'm working with, my Ed Doctorate cohort, which is just a brilliant collection of educators from all over Canada, as well as we have some Canadians who are teaching all overseas. They're keeping me very fired up as well with all that stuff, which is important if you're thinking about doing your doctorate or possibly engaging in a grad school or doctorate. It's so important to have a collection of people who are in the same classes with you that are fighting the same fights.
Yeah, and when those programs are structured in such a way that collaboration is immediate and regular, I mean, it does take a certain amount of time and commitment, but that can be really, really valuable. Well, finally, Vince, how and where can we connect with you on your learning journey?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Vince Busta or Vince Busta, or on Instagram. My academic stuff is on Twitter more, and on my Twitter profile, there's a link to some of the work that I've been doing with Core and Press, as well as a way to get a hold of me if you are looking to bring me in to work with your school sites. There's just a little button there. So if you follow Twitter, you can just click on my profile website there. and that's what it looks like. And then you can just connect with me through there. But my inbox is always open. So if you have some questions or you want to learn more about Great Teaching by Design or assessment, whether it's distance, remote, blended, whatever it looks like for you in your current reality, feel free to shoot me a DM on Twitter, and that's how we can connect.
Folks, you've heard it here. Thank you so much, Vince, for all of your expertise in these spaces, whether it's assessment, Great Teaching by Design. So excited to follow your work and thankful that we are connected. Thank you again for sharing your time with the audience this weekend, and enjoy the rest of yours. I know you're headed off for some fun times in the mountains.
Thank you very much. I so appreciate being here. I love your podcast and your work, and looking forward to following along, continuing to follow along.
Thanks, Vince. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.